Chapter 56 Carol and the New Recruits. Carol arrived from Miami the morning after Albert left for Philly. She came back with the 3 recruits that she started training in Miami to finalize their training and familiarize them with the Bradley law firm. After they landed, she retrieved her car from the long-term parking lot and was now following the airport shuttle, taking the 3 trainees and their luggage to the new Bradley law office to check in. When they arrived, Carol first noticed the absence of cars in the parking lot and worried about what could have happened that would cause the office to be closed. Before she left, Albert assured her that the firm would handle the trainees' living arrangements and rental cars when they arrived. Now it was looking as if no one were here to deliver on that promise. She thought it was low, but not completely outside the scope of belief that Albert would stick her with having to take care of the trainees. She paid the driver of the shuttle, and while the trainees unloaded their luggage, she went inside. Seeing Margaret behind the reception desk on the phone gave her instant relief. This was Carol's first time being in the new location. Margaret waved her in as she continued talking on the phone. Carol walked the lobby and then down one of the hallways looking around while Margaret was on the phone. Then she remembered the trainees outside. She hurried back to the lobby to find that they'd left their luggage stacked together outside, talking excitedly as they came through the entrance. She still had no answer to the question, "Where is everybody?" But she knew that the trainees were looking to her for guidance, so she acted as if everything was fine. The fact that she didn't know the first thing about this new place is what enabled her to quickly come up with the idea to give them a tour of the new office. 10 minutes later, Margaret found them all in the law library, and she called Carol over to join her. In the hallway, they embraced one another like old friends. "It's so good to have you back. Albert went to Philadelphia yesterday. I think it had something to do with the new lawyers, but he told me to expect you tomorrow," Margaret said. "Girl, it's good to see you too. But where is everybody? We came back a day early because the trainees were finished with school. They just wanted to get up here and get started. But is that going to be a problem?" Carol asked. "No, girl, no problem at all. Everything is all set up. I've got their paperwork at the desk, so whenever you're ready, I can call for transportation to take them to their apartments. Albert gave everybody time off until he gets back. It's supposed to be tomorrow. I wasn't even supposed to come in today, but I was already pulling into the parking lot this morning when I remembered I didn't have to come in today. Good thing, too, 'cause you came back a day early. Girl, there's so much going on you wouldn't believe it. Your aunt came by yesterday with Miss Schmidt. Girl, I love your Aunt Thelma. She is amazing. They met with Albert." "Aunt Thelma and Greta?" Carol asked, confused. "They were worried about not being able to reach you on your phone," Margaret said. "Oh, that's right. I found out that I couldn't reach anybody the day I got to Miami. Every call I made just kept ringing, and when none of them went to anybody's voicemail, I knew that something was wrong. I thought that maybe it would fix itself by the next day, but it stayed the same, ringing but no voicemail. And then I got so busy with the recruits that I didn't think about it anymore. Girl, I didn't even have time to make a call," Carol explained. "Well, I know you want to rest, so I'm going to call the limo so you can take them to get situated," Margaret offered. "Thank you, girl. It's been a long week, and I can't wait to get back to my hotel and just soak in a bath," Carol responded. Margaret left. Then Carol went into the library and brought the trainees up to speed. They all returned to the lobby to await transportation. Carol took the time to call Denise, who answered on the first ring. "Mom, are you back in town? Aunt Thelma just told me yesterday where you were. We were so worried," Denise asked, relieved. "I'm sorry, baby. I didn't mean to worry you. Yes, I'm back now. We just arrived this morning." I'm at the firm right now, but I have a few things that I have to do before I'm finished. I tried to call the day I left, but the phone was acting up. I figured it was something like that, but I was worried that, with the opening of the center, Denise said, trailing off. I understand, sweetie, but don't you worry. I ain't going back down that road no matter what, Carol said emphatically. And I'm going to keep having your back no matter what, Mom. Can I come over for dinner after class tonight, or do you want to rest? Denise asked. I would love for you to come over. Now, Denise, you know that cooking ain't never been my strong suit, and I can't hold a candle to Aunt Thelma, but I can order a mean beef and broccoli, Carol said. They both started laughing. That sounds great, Mom. I have a late class tonight that lets out at 6. I should be there 10 minutes later, Denise said. Okay, baby. I'll see you then. Toodles. Then Carol called Aunt Thelma. They only spoke briefly because she was busy with the late delivery at the grocery store. Before they hung up, Aunt Thelma told her to make sure she called Greta to let her know that she was back in town. Carol called Greta, who was attending an NA meeting, so the call went straight to voicemail. She left a message explaining that she was back in town, where she had been, and why she couldn't call. When she hung up, she looked and noticed that the trainees were having problems trying to make any calls. She smiled, knowing how they felt, because she felt the same way when she first arrived in Miami. She explained to them that it was because the cellular service they used in Miami didn't work in Jacksonville, and vice versa, but she would take them to straighten it out tomorrow. Then she told them to go inside and use the phones in the firm. They filed inside, and 5 minutes later, when the van pulled up, she went inside and told them it was time to leave. Once the trainees were situated in their apartments, Carol dismissed the limo and drove the trainees to pick up their cars from the rental agency. Before they drove away, Carol had each of them program their car's GPS with the address to their apartment complex and the new location of the Bradley firm, reminding them that Jacksonville was much, much larger than Miami, and without the GPS, they were likely to get lost. Then they all cheerfully drove away. Carol stood watching them leave, excited for them as they embarked on this new adventure in their lives. Then she suddenly remembered that she was supposed to be having dinner with Denise and looked at her watch. She still had an hour to go, so she called ahead and ordered their dinner to be delivered. She scheduled for it to arrive at the hotel around the same time that she got there, if she left right now. Then she got in her car and blasted the music on the radio, excited to be having dinner with her daughter and to finally be going back home for the first time in over a week. Chapter 57. The New and Improved Bradley Firm. After finding out that Deborah was already moving to Jacksonville, Albert was fresh out of ideas about what he could do to help Carol, so he stayed in Philly another 2 days, engaging in further clandestine meetings with Phyllis. At one point, they met at an underpass near the airport. She was, after all, a married woman and an easily recognizable public figure. The passion between them was strong as ever, but when she started talking about him moving to Philly, he realized that, just like when they were in law school, their passion once again was going to begin creating problems for the both of them. He had to remind her why they started seeing other people back in the day, jogging her memory. She reconsidered and then agreed that his moving to Philly might not be such a good idea after all. Instead, they planned a more logical and calculated reunion that would take place next year in the Bahamas. He didn't know if either of them really intended to meet up, but it made it possible for them to part ways now. Albert caught a flight back to Jacksonville the next morning and landed just after lunchtime. As he disembarked the airplane, he stumbled and slid a few steps down the boarding bridge. He grabbed the railing and recovered, but was assisted the rest of the way down by the flight attendant. At first, he was confused at how tired he'd become from only a 2-hour flight, until he remembered that he'd been engaging almost non-stop with Phyllis for the past 48 hours. Even though he was tired, his first thought was about the firm. Only after he'd left the tarmac did he find it quiet enough to make a call. Margaret answered the phone in her normal cheery tone. He was not expecting the feeling that followed hearing her voice. "I'm home," he thought, "and very, very happy to be here." He was instantly invigorated. All previous feelings of exhaustion vanished. "Hi, Margaret. How is everything?" he asked. "Everything is going smoothly, Mr. Bradley. Carol came in a day early and has been coming in with the trainees. They are coming along very well." "That's very good to hear. I just touched down, and I'm on my way to the office. I should be there in a half an hour." "Did everything work out? I mean, with the pressing matter?" Margaret asked, curious. "Yes, Margaret, it did. Not like I expected, but it was definitely a successful trip. I will see you soon." "Sure thing, Mr. Bradley." Sure thing, Mr. Bradley. He was surprised at how much he missed hearing those words. He made his way to the parking lot and got in his car. Albert pulled into the reserved parking spot and looked at the new location. It was beautiful. He felt a surge of pride, but it passed quickly when he realized that he had to get his business back up and running. He got out of his car with a burst of energy. When he came in the front entrance, Margaret greeted him. "There he is," she said happily. "Hi, Margaret. Can you call the staff and have them here in an hour?" he quickly asked. "Sure thing, Mr. Bradley. I called them all after we hung up," she answered. He stopped and looked at Margaret. She had already returned to what she was working on and didn't see the look of awe in his face. "Thank you, Margaret," he said. "Sure thing, Mr. Bradley," and although she did not look up, she raised one hand with her index finger extended. When he entered his office, he found the Rolodex still open and a pile of mail in the center of his desk. He closed the Rolodex and paused for a moment, remembering Phyllis. Then he sat down and started going through the mail. After a few moments, he depressed the button on the intercom. "Margaret, can you have Carol come and see me when she has some free time? Oh, and please let me know as the members of the cadre begin showing up." "Sure thing, Mr. Bradley. 2 of them are coming in right now, sir." "Excellent. Would you let them know we are going to have a meeting in the conference room at the top of the hour?" "Sure thing, Mr. Bradley. It's good to have you back, sir." "Thank you, Margaret. It feels good to be back," he responded. 10 minutes later, Margaret told him that Carol was free. "Please send her in, Margaret. Thank you." "Sure thing." Carol entered his office, and he was genuinely happy to see her. "I am so happy to see you, Carol. I mean, really," Albert said. "Thank you, Mr. Bradley. I am happy to see you, too. It's been, what, 2 weeks?" Carol asked. "Well, almost. Closer to 2 than 1, that's for sure," he responded. He came from behind his desk to escort her to the plush chair next to the couch. "Your office is impressive. I like it. I like the whole new place, in fact," Carol said. "It certainly makes a statement about the firm. We are growing," he responded. "That it does, Mr. Bradley," Carol agreed. "This may sound weird, but right now I would appreciate it if you called me Albert. I called you in here not as paralegal for the firm, but as the CEO of the Robinson Community Outreach Center. All your paperwork has been completed, and you can open the doors as soon as you're ready," he said. Carol immediately jumped up and did a high kick. Then she pumped both fists in the air and shrieked, "Yes!" Outside, Margaret heard the shriek and smiled. She knew what it was for. She saw the envelope from the Social Security Administration and laid it on the desk the day after he left, the same day Carol came back from Miami. Inside, Albert was startled by how quickly Carol came up out of the chair. He sat back on the couch, out of her way. As happy as he was for her, His thoughts immediately went back to the conversation they had when she joked about coming over the desk to get him, then about her past that Thelma shared with him in private. Now he was having second thoughts about what might have happened, because what he imagined she could do then was much different than what he was thinking she could have done as he watched her now. After Carol settled down, they began discussing the final details before she opened the outreach center. They were finishing up when Margaret's voice came over the intercom telling him that everyone was in the conference room in case he wanted to start the meeting early. "Thank you, Margaret. I'm on my way." "Sure thing, Mr. Bradley." They exited the office. Carol, smiling, looked at Margaret, who gave her the thumbs up. Then they went to the conference room, where he began the meeting. He welcomed the paralegal trainees and had them introduce themselves. Afterwards, he told everyone to expect to start seeing new faces in the office because they now had enough staff to support a larger cadre. Then he asked his lawyer staff if they had friends or knew of any qualified candidates for the 10 positions. He explained that it would be preferable to hire people that they knew rather than people who were qualified but strangers to everyone there. "I want us to build a great law firm, but I want us to be a family too," he said. The room erupted in applause. There were still a few members who had been around for years and had watched the recent transformation of the Bradley firm from what it was to what it had become. They applauded a little harder than the newer members. Chapter 58. The Rehearsal Dinner. It was Thursday, still 2 days before Paul's ship was scheduled to depart, but whether or not he would actually leave was still a hit or miss. Despite it being something that he'd looked forward to doing most of his life, it took a lot of repeated convincing by Travis and Deborah to keep him committed to leave. His initial reluctance was in letting Deborah pay for the cruise. She had to insist that he let her pay every time they talked about the cruise over the phone before he ended up agreeing to go through with it. After their last call, Travis cautioned her that even though his father agreed before they hung up, he might not have been completely honest with them. "You remember how he was at the dinner when you were picking up the check? That doesn't go away after a few vodkas," Travis said. Deborah thought about it and then decided to call Brenda, the travel agent who was handling the arrangements for the cruise. Deborah had paid the deposit for the 3-month cruise and then added more to ensure that everything was covered down to the smallest detail. Then she explained the situation involving her father-in-law. "It's a common thing that happens, Mrs. Edwards, especially with the older men. But don't worry. I know just how to handle it." "You said he retired from the post office, right?" Brenda asked. "Yes, he did," Deborah answered. "He will be given VIP status the whole 3 months he is on board, right?" Deborah quickly asked. "He is going to get the very best service that we can provide, and I just want to say again how wonderful a thing it is that you are doing for your father-in-law," Brenda replied. That morning, the reality of it all started to sink in. Paul's first reaction to Deborah's offer was just that, a first reaction, a knee-jerk response to something that he'd been wanting to do for decades. Now, after his morning coffee, he was getting into his car on his way to the travel agent, having finally decided once and for all to use his own money to pay for the cruise. The bell over the door rang when he entered the office. The agent came from her office, walking with her hand outstretched to greet him. He took her hand and introduced himself, because although they had spoken over the phone a few times, up until that point, they had never met in person. Before he could say anything else, she asked if he could wait a brief moment while she finished up with another client. Not waiting for him to answer, she turned around and went back into her office, pulling the door closed behind her. He took a seat. That was rude, he thought. After having to wait for 10 minutes, he was considering leaving and coming back at another time. Just then, she came from her office, the door swinging all the way open as she came out. First thing he noticed looking behind her was that no one else was in the office. Before he could say anything, she started. "Mr. Edwards, I apologize for the inconvenience, but when you told me that you were retired from the post office, I knew there was something I could do for you." Now he was completely off balance. All I did was tell her my name, right? He couldn't remember telling her anything else, but she continued talking, and he didn't have time to ponder the question anymore as he listened to what she was saying. "Our policy here at Ocean Getaways is to honor all civil service retirees with a complimentary 3-month trip. We don't advertise it for obvious reasons, but the first cruise you choose through us is free. So here's your itinerary, and I want to thank you for your service." She handed him a folder with the boarding pass and all of the documents that he would need to board the ship. He was perplexed and unable to respond. He held the folder, just staring at her. "I'm sure this is a lot to take in right now, so you just take your time. I'll be in my office if you have any questions." Then she turned and went back into her office, pulling the door closed behind her. He wasn't positive, but he could have sworn he heard her lock the door from the inside. He remained where he was, standing there, waiting for the fog of confusion to lift and for what she'd said to sink in. Then he slowly turned around, folder in hand, and left the agency. Walking to his car, he was still numb from the whole episode. He got in, then just sat, still trying but unable to recall ever telling her that he'd retired from the post office. After looking over the contents of the folder, "I must be getting old," he finally concluded, and started the car. He continued having moments when he thought about calling the whole thing off. Between the confusion and the stress of the whole affair, he just wanted to return to his decades-old routine of hiding from the outside world by staying in his house. But those moments always triggered his memories of Teresa, reminding him that he had been waiting 30 years for her to return. Those thoughts, in turn, made him angry enough to get rid of his old ways at any cost, strengthening his resolve to follow through with taking the cruise. But that was only half of the problem that was affecting his choice to take the cruise. Paul was a very private person, and because he was selling the house, it seemed a no-brainer for him to pack up all the furniture in the house that he hoped would sell while he was away on his cruise. But his real estate broker insisted that if he was serious about wanting to sell the house, then he had to leave everything in the house where it was, except for his clothes and personal items. Again, because he was so private, he viewed everything in the house as personal items. He had come a long way recently in terms of opening up and coming out of his shell, but he could not understand the logic behind letting complete strangers into his home. If it was empty, sure, that made sense, but why did they need to look at all my stuff? Why did they need to look at my whole life? That part was too much for him to accept. It was Deborah who finally was able to convince him to listen to the broker, reminding him that everything in that house was a part of the past, and he deserved better. Given that perspective, he listened to Deborah, and in the end, agreed to leave the furniture in the house. He was sitting in his living room when the telephone rang. He reached over and answered it, at the same time being reminded to call and cancel the service. It was Travis. "Hey, Pop, do you have any plans this evening?" "Not just yet, son. Why, y'all got something going on?" he answered. "Yes. Deborah and I want to take you to dinner," Travis said. "Well, why don't we have dinner over here? I can fire up the grill," Paul offered. "Let's try something different tonight, Pop. How would you feel about going to have dinner on the Philly cruise?" Travis asked, hopeful. The Philly cruise was a local ship that took passengers out on a 4-hour dinner cruise. A DJ played music, and the atmosphere was casual, but the food service was famously high-end gourmet fare. Deborah and Travis were taking no chances when it came to making sure that nothing stopped Paul from enjoying his 3-month cruise. Travis had gone to visit the ship the day before and sought out the chef. After making a healthy donation, he was able to convince the cook to incorporate his father's favorite soul food dishes on the menu. The reason for the dinner was twofold: to find out if Paul got seasick, and to show him what to expect from dining on his ship, and hopefully discourage him from taking meals in his stateroom while he was on the cruise. "Hey, that's a great idea, son. I haven't ever been, but I always wanted to go," Paul answered. "Great, Pop. We'll come and pick you up in half an hour. Love you, Pop." "Love you too, son. I'll see you soon." Paul hung up and thought about having dinner on the boat. He was surprised at how excited he was to go, and wondered what it was that stopped him from going on his own. Then, just as quickly, he reasoned, when you know better, you do better, and gave it no more thought. He had become used to changing his thinking, and no longer focusing on the past. He got up and went into his bedroom to pick out something to wear for dinner. The boat was unexpectedly full for a Thursday night, and Travis was concerned that so many people might interfere with their plan to put Paul at ease. He showed no signs, however, of being uncomfortable with the crowd, and was talkative as he enjoyed his entree of smothered turkey wings, macaroni and cheese, and collard greens. "I wasn't expecting it would be like this. That's some good food," Paul said. "The chefs on these ships are professionally trained, Paul," Deborah said. "Well, I can believe it. These are some of the best wings I think I've ever had. And the music, can y'all believe it?" Paul was excited. The DJ had been given a generous tip by Travis to play mostly 70s R&B, another favorite of his father. The passengers enjoying the dinner cruise were diverse, but the food was unquestionably African American cuisine. Paul was expecting the typical quiet dining experience, complete with the murmurs from muffled conversations going on at every table. But this was entirely different. As the night went on and the drinks started flowing, the conversations grew louder, almost as if each table were trying to drown out the one next to it. He was having a great time, one of the best that he'd had in years. After having had a few drinks, he rose from his seat to join the people on the dance floor. He didn't ask anyone to dance, he just went dancing on his own. Two older women who were dancing together pivoted and started dancing with him. At the table, Travis and Deborah watched, holding each other's hand. They were so happy he was enjoying himself, and that he hadn't gotten seasick. That would have been a deal breaker as far as his going on the cruise. Deborah made a mental note to call the agency back tomorrow and make the final payment. After several songs, Paul returned to the table. "Can you believe it? These people got some rhythm," he said, surprised and winded. "I guess it's all the motion from being on the water," Travis suggested. "That just might be it, Travis. I am so glad y'all brought me here. I really love this." Travis and Deborah looked at one another, feeling immensely proud of themselves, and Paul at the same time. "Then you are certainly going to love your cruise, Pop. It's supposed to be like this every night," Travis added. "Well, I'm definitely ready for it then. I was a little hesitant to be leaving the house in the hands of that broker, but now I don't expect that I'll be thinking about that old shack at all," Paul said. They all started laughing. Then Paul got back up from his chair. "I'm going back to the dance floor. Y'all want to join or stay a bunch of wallflowers?" "Oh, no, he didn't. Come on, Travis. Teach your daddy some moves." Deborah got up, pulling Travis to his feet. He immediately recalled the last time that he danced. It was when he was home alone after taking the day off to deliver that letter to Deborah. By the time they got to the dance floor, Travis had made up his mind. Instead of showing his father some moves, he took Deborah in his arms and slow danced with her to every song for the rest of the night, no matter what the tempo of it was. Chapter 59. Getting Underway. The next 2 days went by in a flash for Paul, as the final preparations were made before he embarked on the trip that he'd dreamt about for decades. While they were en route to the ship, he received a text from his real estate agent confirming that he was aware there would be potential buyers coming to look at his house in the afternoon. Confirming? It was the first text he'd received from the agent, and the first time he was being made aware of the visit. Under normal circumstances, this is the kind of thing that would have set him off, ending his relationship with the untrustworthy agent on the spot. But today, he couldn't have cared less about anything related to that house. They arrived at the port and saw the huge ship, with people milling about near the gangway. Deborah had spent the entire drive checking with Paul to make sure he had everything and telling him what he could expect as a VIP passenger. Now, with only minutes left, she began rushing to tell him as much as she could before he got on the ship. "You will have a personal escort to take you to your suite, so you don't have to get in line. You just go right up," she hurriedly said. "How will I know them?" he asked. "That's not your job, Paul. They will recognize you. At least they better. That's what it means to be a VIP," she said matter-of-factly. Deborah was in her mode, sounding like a mother checking with her child going away to summer camp, and Paul listened to her. She knew way too many details about what he was supposed to expect, especially for someone who'd never taken a cruise herself. He thought about how the travel agent somehow knew that he'd retired from the post office, and suddenly he understood. Deborah paid for this VIP status and was making sure that he took full advantage of what she paid for. Now that he understood, so much more became clear. He understood why she and Travis took him to dinner on the Philly cruise, and why she was so helpful, even persuasive, in getting him to leave the selling of the house to her and Travis. "You are so helpful, Deborah. I don't know what I would do without you. I am so lucky that I was awarded this VIP status from the travel agency, because it must have cost more than any sane person would pay," he said, probing. "Oh, no, it wasn't that much more than the price of the original ticket. It was—" Deborah suddenly stopped talking, but it was already too late. Travis glanced over at her, rolled his eyes, and shook his head. Paul sat in the back and snickered. "Don't worry, Deborah. It was bound to come out sooner or later, and I thank you very much," Paul said. Deborah sat quiet. She had already said too much. Travis pulled into the VIP reserve parking. 2 women who were standing in the lot approached their vehicle carrying a clipboard. Travis rolled down his window. "So who do we have?" the woman asked. "Mr. Paul Edwards," Travis answered, turning to look at his father in the back seat. The other woman walked over and opened the back door. "Welcome, Mr. Edwards. My name is Giselle. If you come with me, I will take you to your stateroom. We will have your bags brought to your room." She held out a hand to help him out of the car. "Thank you, Giselle," Paul said, impressed. Paul accepted her hand and got out. Travis and Deborah remained in the car. Deborah, still sulking, noticed that both women were wearing Louboutin designer heels. "For all the money I paid, they better have red soles," she thought, slightly jealous, making a mental note to get a pair for herself before the day was out. Before they started walking away, Paul went to Travis and hugged him through the window. Then he walked over to Deborah's side and opened her door. He helped her out of the car and held her hands. "I want you to know how much I appreciate everything that you have done here, Deborah, and especially the way you did it. You and I both know how difficult it would have been for you to tell me up front. For that, I love you, Deborah," Paul said. He kissed her on the cheek and hugged her tightly. Deborah, now feeling vindicated, hugged him back with equal emotion. Now feeling better, she went right back to telling him what to expect. As they hugged, she looked over her shoulder at the two women waiting. She reminded him, whispering, "You don't pay for a single thing, not a drink or a pack of gum. You tell them what you want, and they bring it to you. That's what the VIP service is all about. I love you, Paul." Then she broke their embrace and kissed him on the cheek. She started to get emotional, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Don't you think about none of this back here while you're gone. Either Travis or I will take care of that house, even if I have to buy it myself," she said. Paul's mouth dropped open as he did a double take and looked at her, eyes wide. I'm kidding. I wouldn't do that. Really. Look, the VIP was one thing, but I promise you, I'm not going to buy that house. I was only joking," Deborah added. Paul's eyes came back down from the top of his head, and he laughed. "Okay, now that was a good one. You got me good. I will see y'all in 3 months," he said. Then he turned around and walked over to Giselle. Then he turned back and waved to Travis and Deborah. A golf cart had been brought up by two young men dressed in dark blue coveralls, who got out of the cart as Giselle got in, beckoning Paul to come and join her. The line of people waiting to board the ship stretched nearly to the end of the vessel. As they rode by on their way to the gangway, she offered an explanation. "This is our first stop. We're taking on 300 passengers today, and another 300 in Savannah. Then we are taking another group in Jacksonville, so don't be alarmed if you find the ship empty at first, Mr. Edwards. We're going to be full before we leave the States." Giselle was trying to comfort him, but in reality, Paul was happy to hear that the ship would be empty. After they reached the gangway and walked up, he stopped and turned around to look at the view from so high up. "Is this your first cruise, Mr. Edwards?" "Yes, it is. But I went out on the dinner ship here in Philly 2 days ago," Paul said. "Oh, the Philly cruise. How did you like it?" "I had a great time," he answered. "Would you care to have a tour of this ship? It's much larger than the dinner cruise ship," Giselle asked. "Yes, that would be very nice. But I don't want to keep you. I'm sure we can do it at another time, and there are other guests to help." "Not at all, Mr. Edwards. I would have thought you were told, but I'm your personal valet while you are on board, sir." "I'm only here to see that your needs are provided," she explained. He looked at her to see if she was joking, but she wasn't. "Well, I was assigned this job, Mr. Edwards. If you would rather someone else, I totally understand. I will excuse myself with your permission and find a different valet for you." "No, that's not at all necessary, Giselle. I was not aware that I was to have a personal valet. That's all. I want you to stay." "Thanks, Mr. Edwards. Otherwise, I was going to have to pack my bags and disembark the ship. It would have been the second time for me, and I probably would have lost my job." "Well, then it's a good thing we don't have to go through that," Paul said. "Let's go up one level to the promenade and start there. How does that sound?" "Lead on, Giselle. I'm in your hands. And please call me Paul." Giselle took Paul on a complete tour of the ship, including the bridge, where he was introduced to the captain and the second in command, the chief mate. He took it upon himself to tell them how helpful Giselle had been to him on his first cruise. While showing him the third-level recreation room, he heard the blast of the ship's horn, signifying departure. They went outside and watched as the ship slowly began moving further away from the pier, tugboats pushing and pulling it into position. Giselle explained the procedure, and he looked on in wonder at the numerous boats working together to maneuver the big ship. Not long afterward, she escorted him to a stateroom, located above all the other berthings on the deck named penthouse level. Here, every type of amenity that was found throughout the ship was duplicated on this deck for use by VIP passengers only. When asked about the reason for such a level of exclusivity, she explained to him how, if a celebrity were to sail with them, Their presence would likely disrupt the experience that the normal passengers came to have. Instead of a quiet, relaxing cruise, it would be filled with countless paparazzi and, at times, throngs of people clamoring to see the celebrity. He quickly agreed, now fully understanding the necessity. After showing him his stateroom, he told her that he was going to unpack and relax. She told him that the room stewards had already unpacked his bags for him, and then reminded him that she was available to him at any time during the day or night, and not to hesitate to call her for anything, big or small. After she left, he walked around marveling at the spacious quarters. He turned on some music, found an old-school R&B music streaming station, poured himself a snifter of cognac, and sat outside on the balcony. As he watched the sun reflecting off of the water, he thought of the phone conversation when Travis told him what he'd hoped for while he was away at college. "It's not the city, son, but this will certainly do," he thought, smiling. Chapter 60. Under the Jail. 2 days after Paul left, Travis's transfer to the Greater Jacksonville Area Post Office was approved. He had a week to report to his new office, but he and Deborah had been looking forward to moving as soon as the transfer came through, and were ready to leave immediately. With James being appointed to the Philadelphia Judiciary, Dieter Van Meyer made a return to the office, and brought with him replacements for assistant counsel and the position vacated by James. Deborah said goodbye to everyone while James was eagerly looking forward to presiding over his first case. He answered the call from Deborah, telling him that Travis's transfer came through, and they were going to be moving in a matter of days. She wanted for him to join them tonight for a farewell dinner, and James happily agreed. "Yes, it's on me, James, so you don't even have to ask," Deborah said. "I wasn't going to ask, Deborah, since you were the one who invited me to dinner. I thought it was a foregone conclusion," James responded sarcastically. "You know what, James? Never—" "Oh, relax, Deborah. Calm down. I was just playing. But for this to be done right, dinner is on me. I'm really going to miss both of you," James said warmly. "I know, James. We're going to miss you too." "But we are still going to get together for the holidays, right?" Deborah asked. "Holidays are for family to be together, and y'all are certainly family. I'm looking forward to coming down to Jacksonville and seeing everyone again, especially Carol. Albert told me that she completely changed the mood in his office for the better. I know that she would love to see you too. So dinner is at 7? Oh, wait. If you're paying, then you get to pick the place," Deborah said. "I was thinking about that jazz restaurant near downtown. Does that work for you?" "Sounds great. But I heard about those waitresses over there. Anything you want to tell me?" "Yes, I will see you tonight at 7, Deborah." Then he hung up, smiling. James returned to doing nothing in his chambers, and minutes later there was a light tapping at the open door. He looked up to see Judge Brown peeking in. "Thomas! Come in, Your Honor," James said cheerfully. "Hi, James. It's just us here. No need for any of that Your Honor jazz. So, how is it going, my friend? Are you all settled in?" "I don't know if I am or not. Am I supposed to have a staff or something?" "A staff? Where do you think you are, in D.C.?" "No, we don't get a staff here. You get help by court appointees. They are sheriff deputies on loan from the Department of Corrections on rotating schedules. After 30 days, someone new takes their place, but after a few months, you'll start to see the same faces, and they start to warm up to you then. I'll tell you this, though, every one of them is top-notch." "So how does it work? When do I get started?" James asked. "We judges have a weekly meeting to divvy up the pending cases. We just had our meeting the day before yesterday. So just sit tight for now, and I'll show you the ropes. But if you want, I have a case I can give you. It's some scumbag who got caught soliciting an undercover cop, so it's really an open and shut case," Tom said. James thought it was odd hearing Tom call the suspect a scumbag, as if he'd already been convicted. Then he remembered that he called it an open and shut case. "I will bring you the file. Do you have any plans for lunch?" Tom asked. "No, I don't have any plans," James answered. "Okay, we'll do lunch. Come on with me and get this file. The court date is set for tomorrow, but like I said, it's an open and shut case, but it will get your feet wet." James followed Tom to his chambers and returned with his first case. He spent the rest of the morning going over statutes and sentencing guidelines for the charges that the man was facing. After lunch, he returned to his chambers and went over the case again. Later that afternoon, he prepared his robe for the next day, and, unable to find anything else to do, left for the day to prepare for his dinner with Deborah and Travis. At dinner, they talked about Jacksonville, discussing what Travis knew of the office where he would be taking over. James had been busting at the seams to tell them of his first opportunity to preside from the bench. As he spoke, Deborah and Travis listened intently, captivated by how the system worked from a judge's point of view. "So really, it's just a matter of going through the motions," Travis said. "In this case, going through the motions is literally exactly what it is," James said, laughing. They all started laughing, when Deborah, who had been lost in thought since James started, snapped her head to the side. "I wonder whatever happened to Sam," she said, thinking out loud. "I never said anything. What's going on here?" James asked, raising his voice, confused. "What do you mean? What are you talking about, James?" Deborah asked, matching his tone, equally confused. "I never told you his name. I know that I didn't. So how did you know?" "Know what? What are you talking about?" Deborah responded. Travis could hear the conversation between them getting out of control. "Everybody calm down," Travis said, interrupting their conversation. "There's just some confusion right now. Back in the day, Deborah knew a man who took advantage of young girls, and his name was Sam. He got away with it almost 20 years ago. His name was Sam Watson," Travis explained to James. James stopped eating, still holding his fork near his mouth. He coughed with a mouthful of food. Travis thought he was choking and immediately jumped up out of his chair. James raised his free hand to stop him, letting him know that he was not choking. Then, as he swallowed his food, Travis sat back down. Deborah looked at James quizzically. After he swallowed, James picked up his water glass and took a drink to clear his throat. "If you really want to know what happened to Sam Watson," he said calmly, "come to court tomorrow, because that is the name of the man I'm going to be trying." Deborah and Travis looked at one another, their mouths hanging open in amazement. James thought about the ethics involved when talking about the man whose fate he was going to be responsible for deciding tomorrow. Then he recalled Thomas telling him the case was open and shut, so he asked Deborah what she knew about him. Deborah had never shared anything about Sam with anyone except for Travis. It was too embarrassing for her to have to admit the really bad things that she'd done in her past, and for a quick moment she heard herself telling Carol that she had to accept who she was if she wanted to change. So Deborah told James everything, holding Travis's hand while she did. She knew that he would squeeze her hand if there were any details that he wanted her to hold back on, but since they were leaving Philly anyway, it really wasn't that troublesome to him if James knew. "So you mean to tell me he's been getting away with this for 18 years?" James asked. "That's exactly what I'm telling you, James," Deborah answered. "And he's Gary's biological father?" James asked. Still no pressure from Travis's hand, so she answered, "Yes, he is." "Does he have any other kids? I mean, that you know of?" James asked. "I don't know of any, but it's likely. If he's still doing it, then I would guess that he does," she answered. James sat back in his chair, trying to come to grips with what was happening. "Travis, what do you think? You've been too quiet through all of this." "I met the man, and I knew what he was. I could tell even if Deborah hadn't already told me. He's a scumbag, Travis said. James chuckled when he heard that word again being used to describe the man. A scumbag, huh? A true blue, dyed-in-the-wool, child-molesting, dirty, rotten, sicko scumbag, Travis said. Well, don't hold back, Travis. Tell me how you really feel, James said, laughing. Suddenly, the mood of the table changed, and everybody started laughing. As they continued eating, the conversation switched from Sam Watson. Now they were almost done with dinner. Well, will I see y'all in court tomorrow? James asked, curious. Before Deborah had a chance to express the multitude of reasons why she would be there, Travis cut in, and to keep the mood from going back to where it was, he said, You can count on Deborah and I being there. Let's not forget, this is your first case, and we were going to be there anyway. Deborah looked at him and then calmed back down. Travis lifted his glass, and they all toasted James's first day on the bench. The next day, Deborah and Travis arrived in court and sat behind a group of people in the back, blocking them from potentially being seen by Sam. Because it was the only case on his docket, Sam was brought from the back and put into the box for the accused. When James entered the courtroom wearing his black robe, Deborah felt proud of him and wanted to clap. The bailiff gave the command, All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable James A. Carver presiding. Afterwards, everyone was instructed to take their seat, and the court proceedings began. Sam had a smooth young lawyer representing him, who highlighted his many years of service to the city as an investment banker and his many years as a dutiful husband. As he spoke, James's poker face was on full display, albeit known only by Deborah and Travis as they sat watching him from the rear of the courtroom. Sam's lawyer continued pleading his case, emphasizing that this was his first offense and he was only trying to help who he thought was a young girl in trouble. His lawyer knew that this was an open and shut case because there was a mandatory minimum sentence for the charge, but he was putting on a show of his abilities, hoping to get noticed by anyone in the courtroom who could further his career. After he rested his case, James asked Sam to stand. Mr. Watson, do you have any children? No, Your Honor. My wife and I are unable to have children, Sam replied. Sam turned to look at his wife in the front row. She sat stoic, facing forward, and did not acknowledge him at all. Then he turned back and looked at James. But do you have any children, sir? James repeated. Like I said, Your Honor, we can't have children, Sam repeated his answer. Mr. Watson, you are under oath. I'm going to ask you one more time for the record. Do you have any children? James pressed. Your Honor, I can say that I don't have any children that I'm aware of, Sam responded. That's what I thought, Mr. Watson. Please remain standing, sir. James motioned for his lawyer to stand near him as James announced the verdict. For the crime of attempted solicitation of a minor child, this court finds that you are guilty of said charge. The state of Pennsylvania has placed a mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years in state prison. In addition to the 2-year sentence, Mr. Watson, I am adding an additional 16 years for a total of 18 years without the possibility of parole or early release. It is my duty to protect the citizens of this city, both adults and children. As you said, you have no children that you are aware of, so in the event that you have a child out there now, sir, that child will be no less than 18 years old before you are able to potentially do it harm. I will have prevented you from harming another minor in the eyes of the law, and have discharged my duties to the best of my abilities. Your Honor, we will be filing an appeal, his lawyer said immediately. Duly noted. Now, if there's nothing else, James raised his gavel and brought it down onto the wooden block, the sound echoing in the courtroom, bringing to a close his first court case. As he stood up, the bailiff again issued the order, "All rise," and everyone in the courtroom stood. James stepped down, opened the door near him, and walked into the chambers behind the bench. Chapter 61. The Sum of All Cheers. Because the original opening of the Robinson Community Outreach Center had been pushed back for a month, the anticipation for the grand opening was high. Between Thelma and Carl Robinson's support of the center and Albert Bradley's representation, members of the legal community, community leaders, city officials, including the mayor, were in attendance. Friends and family rounded out a crowd of over 500 people. As usual, any time the name Robinson was associated with an event, the local newspapers and television stations came out to take advantage of the opportunity, and now all were eagerly awaiting the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Carol and Greta handled all of the unexpected attention like seasoned pros, smiling and posing for the cameras, as together they cut the bright yellow ribbon, officially declaring the center open for business. The crowd cheered, Gary, Denise, and Tony among them. Tony, happy because he was finally able to relax after he'd listed the center as the place he performed volunteer work in his application package to college, and panicked when the opening was delayed. Now, along with other members of the Robinson family, they all cheered, watching the television cameras surround Carol and Greta, interviewing them as they walked into the center for the first time. The Robinson family members had been instructed by Aunt Thelma to meet at the mansion after the ceremony. A convoy of vehicles, some family members, and others, including Albert Bradley and all of the staff at his firm, arrived at the mansion and found a reception prepared for them, with the DJ from the wedding playing music on the patio outside near the pool. After an hour of socializing, Carl called everyone to attention. "I know y'all wondering why we're here, so I'm going to turn y'all over to a man named Albert Bradley. Some of y'all already know him as the man handling the Robinson business account, and so to everyone else, here he is, Albert Bradley." Albert came over to Carl and thanked him. "Hello, Robinson family. Like Carl said, I am handling the Robinson business accounts, and I'm also representing the Robinson Community Outreach Center." Then everyone applauded. Every member of the Robinson family knew what Carol had been through in her life, and was proud of what she accomplished opening up the Outreach Center. He waited until the applause died down before he continued. "As you all know, Carol has done so many positive things for herself and those around her, including me. So I am here, along with my staff, to offer all of you, as members of the Robinson family, whether you live in Jacksonville or not, the complete legal backing and representation from my firm at no charge whatsoever to you." When he finished, everyone remained quiet. Confused, Albert looked over at Carl. Then Carl came up and stood next to him. "He said, 'All of y'all got a lawyer now,'" Carl repeated. For a second, it remained quiet as they all looked at one another. Then someone hollered, "Well, all right now." Suddenly, everyone began cheering and applauding. The cheering grew louder and then became shouting. People in the neighborhood a few blocks away thought it sounded like someone had scored a touchdown at a football game. The rest of the afternoon was spent by Albert's lawyers taking down all the necessary information from the members of the family they would represent. Carol and Greta eventually showed up, to the renewed cheers and applause of everyone there. The reception lasted until late in the night. The next day at work, Gary took a call from his mother. "Guess who?" "I know it's you, Mom. I have caller ID," Gary replied. "But it can't tell you this," she said. Deborah came up behind him as he stood in the aisle and poked him. Surprised, still holding the phone to his ear, Gary whirled around and saw Travis and his mother standing in front of him. Behind them was Uncle Carl and Aunt Thelma smiling. He was shocked and surprised, but he reached out and hugged both of them before he said a word. "How did—" "Well, son, it's like this. We moved. We are here to stay," Travis answered. "Really? What? When?" Gary asked. "We started the ball rolling last week, and we finished moving in last night." "You didn't really think we were going to miss your birthday, did you?" Deborah asked. Gary's 18th birthday was still 2 days away. "And if you want the day off, you gon' spend it with your mama," Uncle Carl added, still holding his mother and stepfather tightly. A muffled "Yes, sir," was all that could be heard. Chapter 62. And All Else Was Good. 2 days later, Paul's ship pulled into the Jacksonville port on its last stop to pick up passengers before heading to Europe. He was met there by Travis, Deborah, and Gary. He was meeting Gary for the first time, and after he called him Granddaddy, Paul was changed forever. Before the ship left, he told Travis and Deborah that after his house was sold, he was relocating to Jacksonville to be with his family. Over the next few weeks, Gary and Tony were accepted into college. They worked a staggered schedule prepared by Uncle Carl, and 2 years later, when Tony graduated with an associate's degree in business administration, he was made store manager by Carl and Thelma. Gary continued working and studying in college on his way to earn a bachelor's degree in business management. Under Greta's management, the Outreach Center expanded to include operating a halfway house for recovering addicts fresh out of rehab. Carol and Greta's down-to-earth approach in dealing with recovering addicts made them popular among the community of those in recovery. The NA and AA meetings held in the Outreach Center were always standing room only. The Bradley firm continued to thrive, primarily based on the representation of the Robinson businesses, and Albert was able to open an office in the lucrative downtown area near the courts. Not long after opening his office, Margaret arranged everything for what she thought of as his well-deserved vacation, a 3-day trip to the Bahamas. Meanwhile, back in Philly, James's first year on the bench was capped off by his engagement to a lawyer he met in his courtroom who reminded him of Kathy Robinson. When he brought her with him to spend the Christmas holiday in Jacksonville, he half expected her to be a long-lost member of the Robinson family, or some other thing that he never saw coming. Epilogue. After Gary graduated, he was promoted to general manager of the grocery store. Then he and Denise, to everyone's delight, set the date to be married. The ceremony was the second wedding planned by Thelma, and was originally intended to be just a family affair, although admittedly a large one. As expected, she got carried away, and it became a huge function, one attended by all of Jacksonville's local elite. With Denise in graduate school pursuing her Ph.D. in psychology, and because of her family connection, word of her marriage spread among the elite in the medical community of Jacksonville. They showed up to the wedding in droves. It turned out to be the social event of the year. At the wedding reception, Albert Bradley surprised everyone with the announcement that, immediately upon her graduation, Denise would be retained by the firm as its psychological consultant. 2 years later, she graduated, started a private practice, and began her position as consultant to the firm. Later that year, during the Thanksgiving dinner traditionally hosted by Carl and Thelma at the mansion, Gary and Denise announced that they were expecting. To say that the family was happy is as much an understatement as describing the sun as that thing up there in the sky. The next year, in early July, Denise gave birth to a son. they named him Gary Jr. And for the first 2 years of his life, his little feet never touched the ground. In addition to his parents, he was held by both of his grandmothers, both of his grandfathers, all of his great aunts and great uncles, and all of his cousins. Because of all this love and affection, Gary Jr. was a well-adjusted child. By the time he entered the first grade, he was reading at a fifth grade level. Then, at 8 years old, when entering the third grade, his aptitude for reading and writing was annotated in his permanent school record. While reviewing his file, the school counselor called and arranged for a meeting with his parents. During the meeting, she expressed the school's desire to have Gary Jr. participate and possibly represent the school in the National Spelling Bee. But after he expressed an unwillingness to be in the spelling bee, she was reaching out to them to help convince their son to participate. After hearing the reason why they'd been called into the meeting, Gary and Denise looked at each other and busted out laughing. At first they were just regular laughing, but it continued, and now they were in tears laughing, and they just kept laughing. The counselor was puzzled and soon became impatient. "This is a very important matter, and there's no telling how far it can take Gary Jr. in the future," she said, shouting over the sound of their laughter. Finally realizing that they were not going to stop laughing, she sat back, letting the pen slide through her fingers, point first, onto the desk. Resigned, with her eyes rolling and head shaking, no longer trying to conceal her displeasure with the two, who just continued laughing, she began thinking, how immature young parents are these days. There is nothing funny about this, nothing funny at all, not one little bit. As she sat in her office listening to their laughter, she opened the child's folder, looking over his grades. Shaking her head, she thought, I don't see where he gets it from. The end.